Hello, everybody. How are you doing today? I hope you are all doing well. I hope you had a wonderful week. And I have some good news. I think I might have shared this last time, but I do not know. It's just been a long week. Well, I found out that I can actually graduate early, which means I will graduate in May. So that's super exciting. There were also quite a few birthdays that were celebrated. My sister and two of my cousins, and then of course the chief editor had a birthday as well. Yeah, it's been a pretty good week. It's just been busy with school and volunteering and now doing this. Today we're going to talk about compliance, because compliance is technically a form of manipulation, or like manipulation is used to get people to comply, which is something that I want to go over. So, have you ever been in a awkward situation where you didn't want to do something but you said yes anyway? Think about that. I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. Alright, so compliance is a type of social influence where an individual does what someone else wants them to do, following his or her request or suggestion. It is similar to obedience, but there is no order, only a request. So, obedience is following an order, whereas compliance is following a request. Best and easiest way to think about it. According to Brecker, Olson, and Wiggins, in 2006 they wrote about compliance. They said that compliance refers to a change in behavior that is requested by another person or group. The individual acted in some way because others asked him or her to do so, but it was possible to refuse or to decline. So situations calling for compliance take many forms. These include a friend's plea for help, sheepishly prefaced by the question, "Can you do me a favor?" They also include the pop-up ads on the internet designed to lure you into a commercial site, and the salesperson's pitch for business prefaced by the dangerous words, "Have I got a deal for you?" Sometimes the request is upfront and direct, what you see is what you get, and at other times, it is part of a subtle and more elaborate manipulation. So this can also be people that come door to door with you, like Jehovah's Witnesses, or that pest control guy in the neighborhood that is trying to get everyone to sign up, or something like that. I know we've had plenty of those at our house, to where we had to eventually just put up a no soliciting sign because, quite frankly, we don't want any of those services, and if we need services, that's what the internet is for. We can always Google and find what we need. And it gets old pretty fast. Like, at first, it's not too bad when you get knocks and rings at your door, but when your dog is constantly barking, or they're waking up your husband and they can't sleep, yeah, that's when it definitely becomes a problem. So there are a couple of techniques that people use to make it to where people are more likely to comply with their request. And so the first one, I wouldn't say my favorite, but this is one of the first ones that I learned in my class. It's called the foot in the door technique. So this is a compliance tactic that assumes that agreeing to a small request increases the likelihood of agreeing to a second, larger request. Initially, you make a small request, and once the person agrees to this, they find it more difficult to refuse a bigger one. So for example, imagine one of your friends missed the last psychology class and asked to borrow your notes. This is a very small request that seems pretty reasonable, so you lend the notes to your friend. But then a week later, this same friend asks to borrow all of your psychology notes. This is a pretty large request, don't you think? So would you agree or would you not? The foot in the door technique works on the principle of consistency. People prefer not to contradict themselves in both actions and in beliefs. So this means that as long as the request is consistent with or similar in nature to the original small request, the technique will work. Sherman in 1980 called residents in Indiana and asked them if, hypothetically, they would volunteer to spend 3 hours collecting for the American Cancer Society. 3 days later, a second experimenter called the same people and actually requested help for this organization. Others responding to the earlier request, 31% agreed to help. This is a much higher than the 4% of a similar group of people who volunteer to help when approached directly. So another way to think about this is, say you have a politician come up to your door and they knock on your door and they ask, hey, can we give you a button or a sticker or like a pamphlet so you know kind of what my policies and beliefs are so that way you can be better educated for a vote. And you say, okay, sure, yeah, hand me a pamphlet. Then, a few days later, the same politician knocks on your door and asks to put a yard sign out in your yard. You are more likely to comply and say yes because they've already made that first small request. Okay, so now I'm going to play an audio clip from Big Bang Theory, and in this episode it pretty much showcases this technique.
I'll take care of you. What do you need?
Well, my mom used to give me sponge baths.
Okay, ground rules. No sponge baths and definitely no enemas.
Agreed.
Okay, nice and cozy. Okay, I'll see you later.
Wait. Will you please rub this on my chest?
Oh, Sheldon, can't you do that yourself?
Vapor rub makes my hands smell funny.
But Sheldon...
Please.
I can't believe I'm doing this.
No, counterclockwise are my chest hair mats.
Sorry.
Can you sing Soft Kitty?
What?
My mom used to sing it to me when I was sick.
I'm sorry, honey, I don't know it.
I'll teach you. Soft kitty, warm kitty, little ball of fur. Happy kitty, sleepy kitty, purr, purr, purr. Now you.
Soft kitty, warm kitty.
Little ball of fur. Keep rubbing.
Little ball of fur.
So are there any other examples that you can think of? The next one, I don't know why all of these have to do with doors. I guess because maybe at the time there were a lot of door-to-door salesmen type and they use these techniques and they do seem to work. So this one is called the door in the face technique. The door in the face technique is a compliance method whereby the persuader attempts to convince the respondent to comply by making a large request that the respondent will most likely turn down. This technique achieves compliance as refusing a large request increases the likelihood of agreeing to a second, smaller request. So initially you make a big request which a person can be expected to refuse. Then you make a smaller request which the person finds difficult to refuse because they feel like they shouldn't always say no. So if we go back to the example of the politician, say that this time they knock on your door and they ask, hey, can I put a yard sign out in your yard? And you don't even know who this politician is, you don't know their beliefs, you don't know what they stand for. So you're like, no, I'm not comfortable with that. But then they say, okay, well, can you at least take a pamphlet and learn more about what I stand for? Then you're more likely to say yes. That's kind of a small example. Now another one is, for example, negotiating a pay raise with your boss. So first you make a request that will not be met and ask for 20%. When this is refused, you make a more realistic request and ask for 10%. So a lot of that can also deal with when you're getting hired for a job. Like say that the estimated annual salary will be $60,000. Or instead, you don't want to make the low ball of that, so you actually request $80,000. They're like, no, but we'll do $60,000. We're like, okay, when initially that's what you wanted. So C.L. Denny in 1975 asked participants if they would escort a group of young criminals to the zoo. Most refused, which were the control group. In control group 2, participants were approached and asked to spend 2 hours per week as a peer counselor to young criminals for around 2 years. Again, most said no. However, in the experimental condition, participants were asked to be peer counselors, and then the request was downgraded to escort children to the zoo, which was the target request. And 50% agreed to the request. So that was pretty much shown to say that that technique works. Because that first control group was like, no, we're not going to escort them to the zoo. And then with the other control group, they asked if they would be counselors. They said no. And then they said, oh, will you escort children to the zoo? And they said yes. So it has been found that the foot in the face... The door in the face technique produces high levels of compliance only when the same person makes the request and the requests are similar in nature. This technique works due to the principle of reciprocity. Saying no to a large request may make the person feel they owe the other person who made the request a favor. Okay, now I'm going to play a clip from South Park. Don't worry, it's not vulgar, but it does perfectly show this technique.
Yes? Hello, ma'am. We're going around town and offering snow shoveling service. Would you like your driveway and sidewalk shoveled for $8,000?
Oh, well, I certainly could use some little snow shovelers, but $8,000 seems a little steep. How about $15?
It's a deal. All right, guys, let's get to work.
Alright, and then the last one. This one is called the low ball technique. So the low balling technique is a compliance method in which the persuader gets a person to commit to a low ball offer they have no intention of keeping. Then the price is suddenly increased. Since a person has already committed, it is hard to say no to the new higher price demand. Me and my husband have seen this with when we were in Sam's Club. They were AT&T, I think, and they were advertising a new service plan, and you would get the new iPhone. At the time, it was the iPhone 12, and you would pay so much a month for your service. You get the new phone and an additional phone, but then after 2 years, your service will go back up. So you think, oh, this is a really nice deal, but then they don't tell you, the cost of switching from your company already to the new one, the payments for the new phone, all of those type of things. So that is one example that we have seen. And I think there's another one that I will talk about because I'm going to read a little bit more of the description of this. So another example is when buying a car, the salesman agrees to a price but must check with his manager if this is acceptable. While waiting, you think you have secured a good deal. So then the salesman returns and says that the manager would not agree the deal and the price is raised. And then most people agree to the higher price because I think they're already committed. Cialdini in 1978 asked students whether they would participate in a psychology experiment that started at 7 a.m. and most participants refused, which was the control group. Honestly, I would probably refuse because my schedule is super busy. So, in an experimental condition, Cialdini asked participants whether they would participate in a psychology experiment, and even though they weren't told a time, most participants agreed. Later, they were told that it started at 7 a.m. and given the chance to drop out if they wanted to. On the day of the experiment, 95% turned up because they already felt obligated to do so. The success of this technique works on the principle of commitment. Because the person had already said yes or agreed to the initial request, commitment has already been given. When the request changes or becomes unreasonable, the person will, to a degree, find it difficult to say no because of having originally committing themselves. So 3 different techniques. Now I want to share a story about a company, I don't even remember what they're called, that I believe they used all 3 of these techniques. So when we were at a festival in Omaha, and there was a drawing to win a grill. And so we put our drawing in, and then we got a call about a week later saying that we were winners of the drawing. And we were super excited, but they said, oh, it was an office drawing, that in their local office they do a small drawing and you get to pick a prize or two. And so we're like, cool, that would be great. And so they're like, okay, we'll come over and you can select what prizes you want. So what they do is, before they actually give you the prizes, they show you some of their products, how they work, and those prices are extremely high. Like, ridiculously high. Like Ford vacuum and I think a humidifier. And so we were confused because we thought we were getting prizes, and we're like, are these the prizes? And they're like, no, this is products for a company. We're like, well, we just want the prizes. So what they were trying to do was they were trying to kind of foot in the door there to be like, oh, look at these products. Like, we're already going to give you a prize, like a smaller prize, so a smaller request. And then here's a big request. And then once we got out, we got our prizes. Then the salesperson started trying to talk business with us. And they're like, this is what these prices are. And it was extremely high. We're like, no, we can't afford that, and we don't want to buy it. And she's like, oh, well, let me call my manager. And then they talked about offering a lower price, and this went on, but we were uninterested. And they finally stopped when my husband was like, the only way that we would get these is if they were free, because that's what we were expecting for the free prizes, and that's it. Like, we don't want your products. You know, we only did the drawing for the grill, and even that hasn't happened. So I believe they used all of these techniques. They were trying to get us to comply and comply and comply. And they do teach salesmen to use these techniques. They don't always give them the names of them, but they teach them how to do this and how to comply, because for some reason we are socially influenced that way, to where we feel like, oh, we're already committed, or we've already said yes to something, or the consistency of seeing the same person. Can you guys think of any other examples? If you're a salesman, I'm sorry for picking on you, but, you know, it is what it is. And if you're able to make people comply, you're a pretty good salesman. But it does have to do with the social influence and those aspects. Now, like I said, one of the scientists, or one of the psychologists here, said that compliance was compliance was more of a subtle and more elaborate manipulation. And that's what these techniques fall under. So it is still part of manipulation, which we are going to talk about more and more, especially since we've kind of been on the topic of mob mentality. I do want to get into cults and their leaders and how they manipulate their people. So this was just kind of a preview to that. You will see them use these type of techniques as well. So sorry that this week's episode is a little bit short, and I also apologize. I know the last episode's audio was not the best. I recorded in a different place than normal, and it just didn't turn out that well, and I really wanted to get an episode out to you guys. So which of these techniques have you complied to? Which ones have you used before? That, my friends, is part of compliance. I am your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you've been listening to What the Psychology. Stay psyched, y'all.